Welcome back for a video game, or rather, welcome back for a new collection video. This is part 2 of my fighting game collection. First, we will be starting with Microsoft, going backwards to the first console, and then we will be looking at Sony for the second part of this. But first up, don't have many Xbox One fighting games, sadly. But the first one, of course, is Marvel Infinite, which I continue defending this game because I love it. Next, we have Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which is, of course, my favorite 3D fighter of all time, or 3D graphic fighting game, and my favorite in the Versus series. So overall, I would consider this my favorite 2.5D. And last, for Xbox One is, of course, Killer Instinct Definitive Edition, which is a great game. And of course, if you have not played it, whether you have a console, Xbox One, or you have a PC, do yourself a favor and seriously get this game off the Windows Store. It's an amazing fighting game. It's, in my opinion, the best fighting game of the 8th generation. Next, we move on to the 360. First up, we have two BlazBlue games. It's only been in recent time I've started checking out the BlazBlue games. Now, believe it or not, when I originally picked these up, I paid only $1 a piece on these games, because the person was just wanting to sell, for some reason, their Xbox One games pretty cheap overall. I bought some other stuff, but these were the fine games I got. And pretty dang good price, I might add. Also, of more recent time, I am happy I finally have King of Fighters 12 back in my collection. I had it a long time ago when it first came out, but I'm glad to have it back. Also, of course, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, just because it's Ultimate 3. Then we have, unfortunately, the last Virtual Fighter game that's been out. Hopefully, I know there's supposed to be like a new esports thing in the works for the game. I just hope eventually we finally get Virtual Fighter 6. Or get an improved version of like 5 on more current gen would be nice as well. Great game. Gameplay mechanics, everything has always been solid in the Virtual Fighter series. Then we have, of course, Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which is a game that I also love quite a bit. Then you have the different iterations, Super 4, and Arcade Edition. Then base vanilla version of 3, which I love the fact it includes, of course, steelbook and also a little comic. Soul Calibur 5, though it's not a very good game, it's pretty much about my least favorite. Yet, sadly enough, it has just one of the best cover art, I think, of the franchise. And I actually do like this design of Nightmare. It's unique and interesting. And of course, you have Ezio from Assassin's Creed 2. Dead or Alive 4, which is arguably, I think, the hardest game in difficulty and stuff, is the biggest pain CPU-wise in the series. And Alpha 152 is a nightmare. Then you have Dead or Alive 5 Ultimate, which you can get pretty cheap still, and I highly recommend picking it up. Now I'm going to quickly jump cut to the original Xbox. Welcome now to original Xbox. This is the only, well, I have Solar Blade Roar Extreme. I think it's in some of my original Xbox, but that and this are the only two games that I have free without a case. Armageddon, interesting game, and I love the conquest mode in this game. Then, of course, SVC Chaos, which I'm surprised actually SNK has never redone or re-released this game, surprisingly, in more modern era. Though I guess technically them and Capcom have to be on the same page. But it would be nice to see this game get re-released. Also, of course, the beloved Soul Calibur 2. Which, looks-wise, I actually do prefer playing this version of the game, just because graphically it's a lot better, and the fact you can actually get this to output in 720p resolution, which is really impressive for the 6th console generation to think that there was a console able to play stuff in 720p. It's pretty impressive at that time. Next, of course, we have the beloved Marvel vs. Capcom 2. The original Xbox version, which has been going up in price as of late. Actually, all the versions, but PS2 is skyrocketed for some reason. Still, it's starting to get harder and harder to find this game. So, if you ever have the opportunity to pick this up for original Xbox, PS2, or Dreamcast, just pick it up. If you can get it for a reasonable price, I recommend, before it keeps going up. Because of how coveted this game is, I feel it's just going to keep going up in price. Especially if they never remaster it. Next, we have a very interesting 3D fighter from the time period. Definitely interesting and different, though unfortunately it would get cut very quickly and pulled off of shelves just because there was chanting in one of the pieces of music from a Muslim prayer. So it caused a lot of controversy and stuff, so Microsoft pulled this game from all store shelves. So this is actually a relatively not common game to find, though surprisingly it's not very expensive, funny enough. Also, we have Doa3, which still looks amazing for the time when it came out, and it still plays just as good as ever in my opinion. If you have an original Xbox or 360 or whatever, pick up Doa3. Seriously, the soundtrack to this game is amazing, and it still plays excellent to this day. It's ridiculous how good it's aged way better than most fine games of that time. And then we have arguably, probably my personal favorite port of Capcom vs. SNK 2. Just because I think it plays really good on the original Xbox. In my opinion, the second best version is probably the Dreamcast. And I would put in like third place the PS2 port, though I don't have it physical, unfortunately. I have it digital through the PS3 online store. Which, if you get a chance, pick up the digital copy. Then we have a game that a lot of people hate for some reason, but I still really like Capcom Fighting Evolution. I wish more people would honestly give this game a chance. It's really interesting and unique. And I believe you can actually pick this up digitally. So if you have a chance, get it either physical or get digital. And then we'll look at the very first Arc System Works game I've actually ever had, and that being this. This was my first Guilty Gear, as well as my first Arc System Works game, though I never played it a lot, never really got into Guilty Gear like some people out there. Though I appreciate it for its art style and everything. Though I always ended up always gravitating more towards Underdyne Birth. Then we have a game that unfortunately has not aged the best, and gameplay-wise very clunky, but still it is interesting for what it is for the original Xbox. If you are a Marvel or X-Men fan, I do recommend trying to get this game. You can get very affordable, easy enough. Then we have one of the reasons to own an original Xbox was for Dead or Alive Ultimate. Volumes 1 and 2. This is actually the only version of DOA 1 I own, personally, is through the Ultimate. And I actually think this is also the best version of DOA 2. Though I still have a partialness to the Dreamcast game version. just because it was the first DOA game I ever owned. But then we have some other interesting games. Not my least favorite of this specific era in Mortal Kombat, but I still appreciate Deadly Alliance for it was. It was the first really one to implement a real overall story. Then we have arguably currently my number 2 favorite Mortal Kombat game for the longest time. For well over a decade, it was my favorite MK game. And partially because of Onaga, the Dragon King, which is my personal favorite, pretty much boss. Pretty much always been neck and neck with Shao Kahn. I just love Onaga's look design, and I love the massive world in the Conquest mode. Then the only, sadly, collector's variant that I actually own is the Malign version. Though there are many others. You have like a Baraka, a Sub-Zero, Raiden, and Scorpion as well. And last, for original Xbox, we have Tao Fang. This, of course, which was made by some of the same devs as Mortal Kombat. It's an interesting game to say the least. And now we're gonna freeze and go start Sony. And welcome back for the start of the Sony edition. Starting with PS4, which we have, of course, I had to import this to get a physical copy, unfortunately, of the game. That being SNK, Heroines, Tag Team Frenzy. Not a great game overall, but it is definitely unique compared to pretty much any other fine game of this last generation. It's definitely much more unique. But if you're a SNK fan, I do recommend checking it out. Though you may be better off either you can get this digital on PS4, or if you'd rather physical, I probably recommend getting the Switch version. But still, I like it for what it is. Also, Blaze Blue Cross Tag Battle, which is a pretty solid crossover game if you like Ruby, Under Night Birth, Persona, as well as, of course, Blaze Blue. Then we have Injustice 2, which I love. And these, of course, sometime in the future I may talk about my digital version fine games, but for now. And one of the reasons I love this steelbook is for this artwork right here, this design of Superman. That is, as I think, pretty much maybe the best design, or one of my personal favorite designs of him. And the only other Guilty Gear game that I actually own is this one. This was actually one of the first fighting games that I got when I originally got a PS4 years back. And it still plays really great, but I was never willing to shell out the money for the DLC characters, just because I didn't get enough into it. Now we have an interesting game with Jump Force. I still think it's really a dumb title, to be fair. If you like 3D arena style fighting games, or in general you're a big anime fan, you'll appreciate this game for what it is. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of the gameplay of it, I will say I do appreciate it for all the different characters involved. Of course, the game that holds the biggest special place for me, Infinite. Which I just uploaded a arcade playthrough last night. And also I'm working on a future tournament as well for Infinite. But with that said, still love this game, still play it all the time. The only physical copy I have out of the 4 Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Storm games, I only have 4 physical I bought digitally, the Trilogy. Still, actually, even though the gameplay and stuff is different than what I'm used to for a fine game, still it's not bad, and if you're a Naruto fan, you'll appreciate this series of games. And then we have a very much overlooked fighting game with Omen of Sorrow. If you love goth type stuff, goth, culture, music, art, style, and if you like KI, you might actually like this, because it does kind of remind me a little bit of Killer Instinct. But it has its own interesting twist. And keep in mind this was more of an indie developed game, so it's not going to be as impressive graphically or gameplay. It can be a little clunky at times, but still, I like the game for what it is. It is definitely one of the most unique fighting games of this past generation, easily. Then we have Soul Calibur 6, which I love this game, and I actually really like the cover, mainly because I love Gerald of Rivia from the Witcher series. And that was a good idea to advertise like this and have him on the cover art. He is actually one of the few guest characters I feel that fits perfectly in with the Soul Calibur universe, because he's more or less from that same time period anyways, so it makes sense. Then we have all the different versions of Street Fighter V so far. I'm sure they'll come out with a fourth version before it's over. I gotta admit, I think all three versions have pretty good cover art, though I still dare say I think Champion looks the best, mainly just because I love the whole pose with them as well as Gil. Then we have arguably what I consider a must-have for any fighting game fan, that being of course the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection. Also a great game, Dragon Ball FighterZ. The Dissidia NT is a so-so. I actually still like Dissidia 012 for the PSP just a little bit more. Tekken 7. Of course, King of Fighters 14. Transformers, some people may not really consider this a fine game. To each their own. I do, and as a big fan of Gen 1 Transformers, I do appreciate this game. Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Of course. Dead or Alive 6, which I like a lot more than I think a lot of people out there do. And last, Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, which is maybe the best looking 2.5D fine game period from an artistic standpoint. With that said, jumping over a PS3 now. Now a couple of loose ones, Soul Calibur 4, Street Fighter Cross Tekken, Blaze Blue, Vampire Resurrection, also known as Darkstalkers, another Blaze Blue game, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure All-Stars, an interesting little robot fighting game, of course one of my personal favorites, Under Night in Birth, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, Vanilla Marvel 3, and Justice Gods Among Us Ultimate Edition, which was the first version of the game I ever had. Vanilla version, Dead or Alive 5. MK9. Base version, Street Fighter 4. Arcade Edition. Ultra 4. Tekken Hybrid, which I do highly recommend. And Tekken Tag Tournament 2. Now on to PS2. Now on to Virtual Fighter 4. The only free one I have without a case. King of Fighters 2006. King of Fighters 11, which are all pretty solid games. Virtual Fighter 4 Evolution. Tekken Tag Tournament, a classic. A criminally underrated game with Tekken 4. Tekken 5. Street Fighter Anniversary Collection, great for any Street Fighter fan. Also, I highly recommend Street Fighter Alpha Anthology, since it has Alpha 2 Gold, and also includes gym fighters. The cheapest way to play gym fighters. Street Fighter EX3. Soul Calibur 2. Soul Calibur 3. Maximum Impact, the first 3D King of Fighters game. A great collection if you're a Fatal Fury fan. The first Dragon Ball Z game I ever played, Budokai 1, which still holds a special place for me. Bloody Roar 3, which is quite a few people's favorite in the series. Not mine, but I get. Then you have this game, which is arguably skyrocketing in price as of late, which is ridiculous. And now, heading over quickly to handhelds before we go to PS1. First up, a couple of loose games. The original Final Fantasy Dissidia, Tekken Dark Resurrection, Mortal Kombat Unchained, which is basically a handheld version of Deception, and of course Tekken 6. And interesting, of some imports, we have a Soul Eater fighting game. This awesome Vampire Chronicles, which is a collection of a couple of the Darkstalker games, but for handheld. Of course, as I've already said, love Dissidia 012, my favorite in the series. Next, for the Vita, we have, of course, MK9, Dead or Alive 5 Plus, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Street Fighter Cross Tekken, PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, and Justice Gods Among Us. A very interesting anime fighter. And Skullgirls. And now, moving on to PS1 era. First up, the loose stuff. MK Trilogy. MK3. The original Tekken. Tekken 2. Of course, Tekken 3. And a not very good fun game at all with Star Wars Masters of Terrakasi. X-Men vs. Street Fighter, inferior version but still nice to have. Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. Fatal Fury Wild Ambition. Bloody Roar 1. Bloody Roar 2. Battle Arena Toshinden. Technically not a real fighting game, just a special reproduction, like how it probably would have looked had actually gotten a physical release. Thrill Kill. Of course, Mortal Kombat 4, which I still really like this game to this day. Guilty pleasure game, I guess. Then we have an interesting also midway fighter with Biofreaks, known for its difficulty. Sadly does not have the cover art, but Street Fighter EX plus Alpha. Street Fighter EX2 Plus. All-time classics. Also, Street Fighter Alpha 1 and 2, which still remains my favorite Street Fighter series of all time. The classic that started the Soul series, Soul Blade. An interesting mech fighting game for the time, Gundam Battle Assault 2. Evil Zone, and very unique fine game of the time period, and it did involve some of the artists who worked on the Tenchi series, which I'm sure you can tell just by the character design. Underrated, criminally underrated gems, in my opinion, the Bushido Blade series, which I wish Square would revive. Of course, a game I've talked about multiple times and I love, by Koei, the Strega. And last, Rival Schools, a all-time classic for the PS1 and for Capcom fans. Now, I say for last this special thing. Welcome back, and this is a save for last, the 25th anniversary Street Fighter collection, which comes in this cool case. You get a certificate of authenticity. It also includes behind this an art book hardback, a light up statue of Ryu doing his Ryukin. You also get this cool little replica black belt. You get a collection of game soundtracks from the fan series, like this is artwork, and you get many other like game soundtracks throughout the franchise, even including Street Fighter 1. And it includes DLC codes, which I use, that gets you a couple of games, like Third Strike Online Edition, as well as a digital copy, plus tons of DLC and stuff also for Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and of course Ultra Street Fighter 4. And you also receive physical, this cool Blu-ray, which gives you the 25th, or rather an anniversary film collection, which you get, as you see, the Street Fighter 25th Anniversary documentary, Street Fighter 2 the animated movie, Street Fighter 4 The Ties That Bind, Street Fighter 4 original film, and Street Fighter the animated series. And the other physical. Okay, so yeah, this is what the digital entails. DLC and everything for all these games. And last, you get a physical copy of Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition and Street Fighter Cross Tekken. See, these are still factory sealed because I have no intention in opening them. But that is it for the fighting game collection. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel. Stay safe.